You don't belong in this seat, and you sure as hell don't belong on my plane. Captain Douglas Harmon's hand came down hard across her face. Crack. The sound split the first-class cabin like a gunshot. Every passenger froze. Every breath stopped. The young black woman in seat 1A, wearing a faded hoodie and ripped jeans, didn't scream. She didn't cry. She wiped the blood from her lip, looked him dead in the eyes, and said 5 words that ended his entire career. "I own this airline, Captain." He laughed. He wouldn't be laughing in 47 minutes when the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Before we get into this incredible story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels, and stay with me until the very end. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Naomi Carter learned how to become invisible when she was 8 years old. That was the year her parents died in a house fire in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. That was the year she moved into her grandmother's one-bedroom apartment on Linden Boulevard, where the radiator clanged all winter and the ceiling leaked every time it rained. That was the year she realized that the world had already decided what she was worth based on the color of her skin and the neighborhood she came from. Her grandmother, Ruth Carter, was a woman who had cleaned offices in Manhattan for 41 years. Ruth never missed a day of work, not when her back gave out. Ruth taught Naomi one thing above everything else. She said, "Baby girl, let them underestimate you. Let them look right through you, because the moment they stop watching is the moment you make your move." Naomi never forgot that. At 27 years old, Naomi Carter was worth more money than most people could comprehend. She was the founder and sole controlling shareholder of Pinnacle Equity Partners, a private equity firm that managed a $14 billion portfolio. She had graduated from MIT at 20. She earned her first billion before 25. Forbes didn't know her name. Bloomberg had never published her photo. She had no social media, no public profile, no business cards. She was a ghost in the machine of American capitalism, and she had built it that way on purpose. 5 days ago, Naomi had completed the largest acquisition of her career. Atlantic Pacific Airways, a legacy carrier with 38,000 employees worldwide, had been 18 hours from filing Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The board was in panic. The unions were threatening strikes. The stock had dropped to pennies. Everyone on Wall Street had written the airline off as dead. Then Naomi stepped in. $900 million, 71% controlling interest. She bought the entire airline in a single afternoon, and she did it so quietly that not a single reporter, not a single analyst, not a single employee knew it had happened. Only 3 people on Earth knew Naomi Carter was the new owner of Atlantic Pacific Airways. David Langston, the airline's CEO, who had signed the papers with shaking hands. Her grandmother Ruth, who had said, "Lord have mercy, baby, you bought a whole airplane company?" And her attorney Marcus Webb, who had structured the deal through 17 shell companies to keep Naomi's name off every public document. To everyone else, Naomi Carter did not exist. But today, she was about to make herself very visible. Because for the past 6 months, something had been rotting inside Atlantic Pacific Airways, and Naomi was done reading about it from a distance. The complaints had started arriving through encrypted channels 3 months before the acquisition. Anonymous emails, coded messages, passengers who had been humiliated, profiled, questioned, and removed from flights for no reason other than the way they looked. Ground staff who had been instructed to flag certain passengers for additional screening based on nothing but race. Flight attendants who had been disciplined for treating all passengers equally. The stories were consistent. They were detailed. And they were horrifying. Naomi could have sent investigators. She could have hired consultants. She could have ordered David Langston to conduct an internal review and deliver a report to her desk within 30 days. But Naomi didn't build a $14 billion empire by reading other people's reports. She built it by seeing things with her own eyes. So on a Tuesday morning in October, Naomi Carter walked into JFK Terminal 4 dressed like she was heading to a college lecture. Faded Howard University hoodie, ripped jeans that had actual holes in the knees, beat-up Converse sneakers that she had owned since her freshman year. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. no makeup, no jewelry except a silver watch on her left wrist that looked like it came from a drugstore, but was actually a Patek Philippe worth more than most people's houses. She carried a canvas backpack with a cracked paperback novel sticking out of the top. She looked like a 20-year-old catching a red-eye home for fall break. She looked like nobody. That was the whole point. Gate B31 was already busy when Naomi arrived. The Tuesday morning London flight attracted the usual crowd. Business travelers in dark suits clutching their coffee cups and scrolling through emails. A few tourists with camera bags and guidebooks. First-class passengers who carried themselves with the particular self-importance of people who believed that paying more for a seat made them more valuable as human beings. Naomi found a chair near the window, away from the main boarding area, but with a clear line of sight to the gate podium. She opened her paperback and pretended to read while she watched the Atlantic Pacific staff work. The gate agent was a woman named Diane Kessler. Naomi read her name tag from 20 feet away. Diane looked tired, stress lines around her eyes, hair pulled into a tight bun. She had probably been processing passengers since 5 a.m. But Naomi noticed something else. Something that made her stomach tighten. Diane's smile changed depending on who was standing in front of her. A white businessman in a suit got the full treatment. Warm greeting, eye contact. "Good morning, sir. Welcome aboard." A black family with 2 small children got something different. Shorter words, less warmth. A quick scan of their boarding passes with the expression of someone checking for counterfeit bills. Naomi made a mental note. She turned a page in her novel and kept watching. At 9:15, Diane's voice came over the gate speakers. "Good morning, passengers. We'll begin boarding flight AP 508 to London Heathrow in just a few minutes. Please have your boarding passes and identification ready. We'll start with Zone 1, first-class passengers, followed by Zone 2 for business class." Naomi closed her book, slipped it into her backpack, and stood up. She was the first person to approach the podium when Zone 1 was called. Diane looked up. Her professional smile collapsed in real time. She looked at Naomi's hoodie. She looked at the ripped jeans. She looked at the scuffed sneakers. Then she looked at the Zone 1 sign beside the gate and back at Naomi with an expression that was equal parts confusion and suspicion. "Miss," Diane said, and the way she said it carried a weight of condescension that Naomi had heard 1,000 times before. "This is Zone 1 boarding, first class only. General boarding for economy starts in about 20 minutes. You'll need to step aside." Naomi held out her phone. The boarding pass was displayed clearly on the screen. "I'm in seat 1A. Diane let out a short breath through her nose. She didn't even glance at the phone. "Seat 1A is reserved for full-fare first-class passengers, miss. Economy seating starts at row 30. You probably made a mistake when you checked in online." "Scan the code, Diane." The use of her name made the gate agent flinch. Diane's eyes dropped to her own name tag, then back to Naomi. There was something unsettling about this young woman's composure. Most passengers who were confused about their seating would be flustered, apologetic, eager to correct the mistake. This woman wasn't confused. She was certain. Diane picked up the scanner reluctantly. She aimed it at Naomi's phone, fully expecting the angry red beep that would confirm what she already believed, that this girl in the hoodie had made a mistake, that she didn't belong. Beep. Green light. The screen lit up. Passenger, Carter, Naomi. Seat 1A. Class, first. Status, Diamond Pinnacle member. Diane stared at the screen, then at Naomi's sneakers, then back at the screen. Diamond Pinnacle was Atlantic Pacific's highest tier, reserved for passengers who flew over 100,000 miles per year and spent at least $50,000 annually. There were fewer than 200 Diamond Pinnacle members in the entire system. Wait, Diane stammered, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "There must be some kind of system error. It says you're a Diamond Pinnacle holder, but..." She gestured vaguely at Naomi's appearance without finishing the sentence. "But what?" Naomi asked quietly. Diane caught herself. She knew she was on thin ice. Whatever was happening here, whatever glitch or anomaly had put this girl in first class with top-tier status, it wasn't worth making a scene at the gate. "Go ahead," she muttered, her tone making it clear she still believed something wasn't right. Naomi walked past the podium toward the jet bridge. She could feel Diane's eyes on her back like a physical weight. First test passed. The jet bridge was cool and sterile. Naomi's sneakers made soft sounds on the metal floor as she approached the aircraft. She took a breath. Whatever was waiting for her on that plane, she was ready for it. She had been ready for 6 months. She had been ready, in some ways, her entire life. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was everything the brochure promised. Cream leather seats wide enough to sleep in, arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration. Polished walnut trim, soft lighting that made everything feel expensive and exclusive. It was beautiful, and Naomi owned every square inch of it. "Welcome aboard Atlantic Pacific," a flight attendant said as Naomi stepped through the aircraft door. Her name tag read Rachel Torres. She was in her early 30s, blonde hair in a neat bun, and her smile was warm, genuine. But Naomi caught the micro-expression, the tiny falter when Rachel registered the hoodie, the jeans, the backpack. It lasted less than a second. Then Rachel's training kicked in, and the smile returned. "Can I help you find your seat?" "I've got it. Seat 1A. Naomi moved toward the front left of the cabin, the throne seat, the most premium position on the aircraft. She settled into the leather, which was softer than anything she had ever sat in, even though she could afford to buy the company that manufactured it. She pulled out her noise-canceling headphones and put them on. Not to listen to music, to watch, to wait, to see what would happen next. She didn't have to wait long. The cockpit door opened with a distinctive click, and Captain Douglas Harmon stepped into the cabin. He moved like a man who believed the world was built to accommodate him. Silver hair that was too perfect not to be maintained by a professional. A jaw that had been expensive to keep sharp. A uniform tailored just tight enough to hide the expanding waistline of a man who had been eating well on the airline's dime for 3 decades. 4 gold stripes on each shoulder. 30 years of seniority, and an ego that had grown fatter than his waistline with every passing year. Harmon was laughing at something, half turned toward the cockpit where his first officer was still settling in. But the laughter died the instant his eyes found seat 1A. He stopped walking, his jaw tightened, his shoulders pulled back. Naomi saw it all from behind her headphones, pretending to scroll through her phone while tracking every shift in his body language. She had seen that look before. In boardrooms, in restaurants, in luxury stores on Fifth Avenue. It was the look of a man who had just seen something that didn't fit his understanding of the natural order. Harmon didn't speak to Naomi. He walked to the galley area where Rachel Torres was organizing amenity kits and snapped his fingers at her. Actually snapped his fingers, like she was a dog. "Rachel." His voice was low but carried clearly in the quiet cabin. "Why is the seat map showing 1A as occupied?" Rachel looked up, glanced between Harmon and Naomi, and her face tightened with something that looked like dread. "Because the passenger has boarded, Captain. She has a valid ticket." Harmon followed her gaze to Naomi. He studied her with open, undisguised contempt. He wasn't even trying to hide it. "Her," he said, "in 1A? "She has a valid ticket, sir," Rachel repeated, her voice getting smaller. "Full fare revenue ticket, F-class. She's also a Diamond Pinnacle member." Harmon scoffed. The sound came from deep in his chest, thick with disbelief. "Impossible. Computer glitch. Or maybe she's flying on a buddy pass. Did somebody's cousin hook her up with a discount?" "I checked the manifest, Captain." Rachel's whisper was barely audible now. "It's a full fare ticket, $15,000. "Look at her, Rachel." Harmon's voice was no longer low. He wasn't even pretending to be discreet. "Look at her and tell me she paid $15,000 for that seat." Rachel said nothing. Her hands were trembling around the amenity kits she was holding. Naomi heard every word. She was 10 feet away in an enclosed metal tube, and they were making no effort to be quiet. She kept her eyes on her phone, her expression neutral, her headphones around her neck now so she could catch every syllable. She wanted to hear this. She needed to hear this. This was exactly what she had come for. "Senator Whitfield is flying with us today," Harmon continued, his voice rising with indignation. "He's in 4B, but I promised him 1A. He needs the privacy. He needs the space. And frankly, he deserves the treatment that comes with a seat like that." "Captain, the cabin is completely full," Rachel said. "All first-class seats are occupied. I can't move a paying passenger without cause." "You can if she doesn't belong there." Harmon turned away from Rachel and walked straight toward Naomi. He didn't approach her the way a professional would approach a passenger. He invaded her space. He stood over her seat, using his height and his uniform and his 4 gold stripes like weapons. "Excuse me, miss." The way he said miss made it sound like something you'd scrape off the bottom of your shoe. Naomi looked up from her phone. She slid her earbuds down. Her face was calm. Her dark eyes gave away nothing. She looked at him the way you'd look at a stranger who had tapped your shoulder in a grocery store. Mildly curious, completely unbothered. "Yes, Captain?" Harmon was thrown for a moment. He had expected nervousness, maybe embarrassment, a stammered apology and a quick retreat to the back of the plane. Instead, this young woman in a college hoodie was looking at him with the steady, unblinking gaze of someone who was entirely comfortable with confrontation. "I need to see your boarding pass," he said, extending his hand. "I already showed it at the gate." "I need to see it again. There's been a mix-up with the seating chart. We believe you're in the wrong seat." Naomi pulled out her phone and displayed the boarding pass. "Carter, Naomi, seat 1A, first class." The information was right there, clear as day. Harmon didn't look at it. His mind was already made up. "Right," he said, turning to face the other first-class passengers so they could all hear him. "Well, as I suspected, we have a double booking situation here. This seat is actually reserved for a VIP who requires this specific location for security and privacy reasons. I'm going to need you to gather your things and move back to economy. I'm sure we can find you a middle seat somewhere around row 45. The cabin went quiet. 6 other first-class passengers stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. Newspapers lowered, phone screens dimmed. Everyone was listening now. Naomi let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds before she spoke. "I paid $15,000 for this seat, Captain. I'm not moving." The number landed like a brick. $15,000. Even Harmon, with his 30 years of entitlement, knew that wasn't casual money. But he looked at the hoodie. He looked at the ripped jeans. He looked at the sneakers. And his brain chose to believe what his eyes were telling him instead of what his ears had just heard. "Listen to me," Harmon said, leaning in close enough that Naomi could smell stale coffee and something sharper underneath it. "I am the captain of this aircraft. What I say goes. This is my ship, and my word is law here. I don't know whose credit card you used to buy this ticket, and frankly, I don't care. You are not flying in my first class. Not today." "Whose credit card I used?" Naomi repeated, her voice quiet but carrying. "You heard me. Now get your things and move to the back of the plane, where you belong." Where you belong. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been burning a long time. "Art!" a voice boomed from the aisle behind them. Everyone turned. Senator Gerald Whitfield was standing 5 rows back, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his red face showing either high blood pressure or impatience or both. He was a heavy man in his mid-60s who had been in Congress for 22 years and had never once doubted that the world existed to serve him. "What's the holdup?" Whitfield called out, using Harmon's nickname with the casual authority of someone who expected to be the most important person in every room he entered. "You told me 1A was mine. I've got a fundraising dinner in London tonight, and I'm not spending 8 hours in 4B. Harmon straightened up, his chest puffed. Having the senator behind him was like having a second set of stripes on his shoulders. "It will be available, Senator. I'm just clearing out some refuse that wandered into the premium cabin." Refuse. The word hit Naomi in the chest. Not because she hadn't heard worse, she had, but because of how casually he said it, how naturally, as if calling a black woman garbage was just part of his vocabulary, part of his routine. "Refuse," Naomi repeated. "You heard me," Harmon said. He wasn't backing down. The senator's presence had given him rocket fuel. "I'm not leaving this seat, Captain Harmon." "Yes, you are, one way or another." "Check the notes on my passenger profile," Naomi said. "Check them carefully, and then decide if you want to keep talking to me like this." Harmon laughed. It was loud and ugly and meant to humiliate. Passenger profile? You think having a frequent flyer account makes you somebody? I've been flying these aircraft for 30 years. I've transported presidents, CEOs, actual royalty. You are nobody. You're a nobody in a sweatshirt who somehow got her hands on a boarding pass that doesn't belong to her. Rachel Torres stood frozen in the galley. Her hands were shaking. In 7 years of flying, she had never seen anything like this. She knew it was wrong. Every instinct in her body was screaming that this was wrong. But he was the captain. He was her superior. Challenging him would cost her everything. "Captain," Rachel said softly, "maybe we should just check the—" "Don't." Harmon whirled on her so fast that Rachel flinched backward. "Don't tell me how to handle passengers on my aircraft. You're a flight attendant. Your job is to serve drinks and smile. Leave the decisions to people who actually know what they're doing." Rachel's face crumbled. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. Naomi watched the exchange and felt the heat building in her chest. The same fire that had driven her out of East Flatbush. The same rage that had fueled her through MIT, while rich kids assumed she was there on a diversity quota. The same steel that had built her empire before she turned 30. But she held it. She held it the way Ruth had taught her, because the first person to lose their temper is the first person to lose the fight. "I'm giving you one more chance, Captain," Naomi said. "Step back, check my profile, and apologize." Harmon's face went dark red. "Apologize? To you? I don't apologize to people who try to scam their way into first class. I don't apologize to people who think they can play the race card every time someone asks them to follow the rules." "The race card," Naomi said flatly. "That's right. You people always think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can cry racism every time someone tries to maintain proper standards. Well, not on my aircraft. Not in my first-class cabin." The racism was no longer between the lines. It was written in bold print, spoken at full volume in front of a cabin full of witnesses. The elderly woman in 2C. Her name was Margaret Ashby, and she had been flying transatlantic routes since before Harmon was born, made a small sound of disgust. The businessman in 3A lowered his newspaper and stared at Harmon with open shock. Senator Whitfield said nothing. He stood in the aisle and watched like a man observing a moderately interesting television program. Naomi stood up. She was 5'5" in her sneakers. Harmon had 6 inches on her and 60 pounds. But something about the way she rose from that seat made the air in the cabin change. It was the way she held herself, the stillness in her body, the absolute absence of fear. "I'm not your equal, Captain Harmon," she said. His face broke into a grin. Finally she was admitting it. Finally, the natural order was reasserting itself. "That's right," he said, triumph dripping from every syllable. "Now we understand each other." "I said I'm not your equal," Naomi continued, and her voice dropped to a register that Harmon had never heard from a passenger before. It was the voice of someone who had fired CEOs, dissolved boards, and dismantled entire corporations before lunch. "I'm your boss." The grin froze on Harmon's face. "My boss," he repeated, loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to Whitfield. "Did you hear that, Senator? She thinks she's my boss." Whitfield chuckled. "Creative. Does she think she's the CEO too?" "I didn't say I was the CEO," Naomi said. "I said I was your boss. There's a difference." Something shifted in Harmon's expression. A crack in the certainty. A shadow of doubt that he immediately buried under another layer of rage. "You're delusional," he said. "You're having some kind of episode. Maybe it's drugs. Maybe it's mental illness. Whatever fantasy world you're living in, it ends right now." He stepped closer, close enough that Naomi could feel the heat coming off his body, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "I've had enough," he said, his voice shaking now. "Last warning, get off this plane voluntarily, or I call security and you leave in handcuffs." "Captain Harmon," Rachel said from the galley, tears in her voice, "maybe we should just—" "Shut your mouth, Rachel." The cabin was completely silent. Not a rustle, not a breath. Every single person in first class was watching, waiting. Naomi reached for her phone. "What are you doing?" Harmon demanded. "Making a call." "No, No phones. We're about to push back." They weren't. The aircraft was still connected to the gate. Passengers were still boarding in the back. But Harmon wasn't thinking anymore. He was reacting. Pure ego, pure adrenaline. His hand shot out and knocked the phone from Naomi's grip. The device flew across the cabin and hit the floor with a crack that made Rachel cry out. It slid under the seat across the aisle, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. A collective gasp rolled through first class. The businessman in 3A stood up halfway. Margaret Ashby pressed both hands over her mouth. Even Whitfield's smug expression flickered. "No phones," Harmon roared. "We are preparing for departure. You are endangering this aircraft." Rachel scrambled to retrieve the phone, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it twice. The screen was cracked, but still functional. She handed it back to Naomi, with tears streaming down her cheeks. "Thank you, Rachel," Naomi said. Her voice was calm. Too calm. There was something new in her eyes now, something cold and precise and utterly terrifying. "You just made a very serious mistake, Captain," Naomi said, examining the shattered screen. "The only mistake," Harmon spat, "was letting someone like you think you could buy your way into spaces where you don't belong." Naomi looked up at him. She held his gaze for 3 seconds without blinking. "Sit down, Captain. Last chance." Harmon's lip curled. Or what? Naomi reached for her phone again, slowly this time, deliberately. She watched Harmon's eyes track the movement. She saw his hand twitch at his side. She saw the rage building behind his eyes like pressure behind a dam. "Try it," she said softly. "I dare you." The words were barely above a whisper, but they detonated in Harmon's brain like a grenade. 28 years of unchecked power. 30 years of being obeyed without question. 3 decades of believing that his uniform and his stripes and his silver hair made him untouchable. And this girl, this nobody, this young black woman in a hoodie, was daring him. His hand moved before his brain could stop it. Crack! The slap echoed through the first-class cabin like a gunshot. Naomi's head snapped to the side. Her hoodie fell back. Her lips split open, and blood welled instantly at the corner of her mouth. The cabin turned to stone. Every passenger, every breath, every heartbeat suspended in the aftermath of that sound. Rachel screamed. Margaret Ashby gasped so hard she nearly choked. The businessman in 3A was on his feet now, his face white with shock. Senator Whitfield stood motionless in the aisle, his political instincts finally alerting him that he was standing in the blast radius of something that was about to destroy careers. Harmon stood over Naomi, his hand still tingling, his chest heaving. For one flickering instant, something like fear crossed his face, the animal recognition that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But his ego, that monstrous 30-year-old ego, swallowed the fear whole. "That," he said, his voice shaking with adrenaline, "is what happens when you disobey the captain of an aircraft. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to scam your way into places where you don't belong." Slowly, Naomi turned her head back to face him. The left side of her face was already swelling. Blood ran from her split lip down her chin. But her eyes were absolutely still. No tears, no fear, no anger. Just the cold, patient focus of someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. She wiped the blood from her lip with her thumb, looked at the crimson smear, looked at Harmon, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that made the temperature in the cabin drop 10 degrees. It was the smile of a woman who had just been handed everything she needed. "Rachel," Naomi said, her voice steady as bedrock, "hand me my phone, please." Rachel's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the device. She placed it in Naomi's palm like she was handing over something sacred. Naomi unlocked the cracked screen. She navigated to her contacts. The interface was unlike anything the watching passengers had ever seen. Black background, gold text, a handful of entries, each one carrying a weight that was visible even to strangers. Names scrolled past. Secretary of the Treasury, Federal Reserve Chairman, SEC Director. She stopped on one name, Langston, CEO, Atlantic Pacific Airways. Harmon saw the name over her shoulder. His face lost 2 shades of color. David Langston was the CEO of Atlantic Pacific. He had been Harmon's boss for the past 8 years. That was his real, actual name on this girl's phone. But it had to be fake. It had to be part of whatever game she was playing. Naomi tapped the contact, put it on speaker. The sound filled the silent cabin. 1 ring. 2 rings. Naomi? A deep male voice answered on the 3rd ring. Warm, familiar, immediate. We weren't expecting to hear from you until you landed. Is everything all right? Harmon's knees buckled. He grabbed the bulkhead to keep himself upright. That voice, that slight Hispanic accent, that distinctive baritone. He had heard it in every company meeting, every training video, every corporate announcement for the past 8 years. That was David Langston. There was no question, no doubt. That was the CEO of Atlantic Pacific Airways, and he had answered this girl's call on the 3rd ring, using her first name, with the tone of a man speaking to someone who outranked him. Naomi looked directly into Harmon's eyes. No, David, she said clearly, the service is not up to par. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted exactly 4 seconds. Naomi counted them. She had learned a long time ago that silence was the most powerful weapon in any negotiation. 4 seconds of silence after a statement like that could break a man faster than any argument. What happened? David Langston's voice came through the speaker, tight and controlled, but Naomi could hear the edge underneath it. She had worked with David for 5 months during the acquisition. She knew how he sounded when he was calm, and she knew how he sounded when he was afraid. Right now, he was afraid. Naomi kept her eyes locked on Captain Douglas Harmon's face. She wanted to see every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt, every crack in the armor of arrogance that he had been wearing for 30 years. Captain Douglas Harmon just slapped me across the face, David. She said it the way you'd report the weather. Clear, factual, no emotion. And that was what made it devastating. Because the words themselves carried all the horror they needed. They didn't require tears or trembling or raised voices. They just needed to be true. The silence that followed was different from the first one. This silence had weight. It pressed down on the cabin like a physical force. Naomi could hear Langston breathing on the other end of the line, short, shallow breaths, the breathing of a man whose world had just tilted sideways. He did what? Langston's voice was barely a whisper. He slapped me, open hand, across my face, because he decided that I didn't belong in seat 1A. Naomi touched her swollen lip gently. The blood was still wet on her fingers. He called me refuse, David. He told me to move to the back of the plane where I belong. He accused me of stealing a credit card. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. He knocked my phone out of my hand and shattered the screen. And when I told him he was making a mistake, he struck me in front of a cabin full of witnesses. Harmon's face had gone the color of raw dough. His mouth opened and closed twice without producing any sound. His hand, the one that had delivered the slap, was hanging at his side like it belonged to someone else, like it had acted on its own, and he was only now realizing what it had done. Dear God, Langston breathed. Naomi, listen to me. Do not move. Do not leave that seat. I am calling air traffic control right now. I am calling Port Authority. I am getting in my car and coming to that aircraft personally. Do you understand me? Do not move. There's more, Naomi said, and her voice carried through the first-class cabin like a bell tolling in an empty church. He did this in front of Senator Gerald Whitfield, who watched the entire assault from 5 feet away and said nothing. Not one word, David. A United States senator watched an airline captain assault a passenger and stood there like he was watching a football game. Every head in the cabin turned toward Whitfield. The senator's face cycled through 3 colors in 2 seconds, red to white to gray. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. For the first time in 22 years of political life, Gerald Whitfield had absolutely nothing to say. He also did it in front of your flight attendant, Rachel Torres, Naomi continued. Rachel tried to intervene. She tried to tell Captain Harmon that I had a valid ticket, that I was a Diamond Pinnacle member, that I had done nothing wrong. and Captain Harmon told her to shut her mouth. He told her that her job was to serve drinks and smile. He humiliated her in front of passengers for trying to do the right thing. Rachel Torres was pressed against the galley wall, both hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She had heard every word. She knew that her name had just been spoken directly to the CEO of the company she worked for. She didn't know whether that meant she was being praised or destroyed. "David," Harmon suddenly found his voice. It came out cracked and desperate, nothing like the commanding tone he had used 5 minutes ago. "David, it's me. It's Doug Harmon. There's been a misunderstanding here. This woman, she's not who she says she is. She's some kind of con artist. She's running a scam. I was trying to protect the integrity of the cabin. I was trying to—" "Captain Harmon," Langston's voice cut through the phone speaker like a surgical instrument. Cold, precise, final. "You will not speak to Ms. Carter again. You will not look at her. You will not move from where you are standing. You will remain exactly in that position until security arrives. Do you understand me? Ms. Carter, not the passenger, not this woman, not the person claiming to be." David Langston, the CEO of Atlantic Pacific Airways, had called her Ms. Carter. He knew her name. He knew who she was. And the way he said it, with that unmistakable tone of deference, of respect, of something that sounded almost like fear, told Harmon everything he needed to know. This was real. "David, please," Harmon said, and his voice cracked on the word please, like a teenage boy going through puberty. "I've been with this airline for 30 years. 30 years, David. You know me. You know my record. This isn't who I am. She provoked me. She was being disruptive. She was—" "Captain Harmon?" Langston's voice dropped another 10 degrees. "You are fired, effective immediately. Your employment with Atlantic Pacific Airways is terminated with cause as of this moment. You will be escorted off that aircraft in handcuffs. And I promise you, on everything I hold sacred, this is only the beginning of what is coming for you." Fired. The word hit Harmon like a bullet to the chest. 30 years. 30 years of early mornings and late nights and missed birthdays and holidays spent in hotel rooms halfway around the world. 30 years of building a career, a reputation, a pension. Gone. In one word from a phone speaker. "You can't do that," Harmon said, and the desperation in his voice was so raw that even some of the passengers who despised him felt a momentary twinge of human pity. "The union, my contract, I have rights. You can't just fire me without due process." "You forfeited due process when you assaulted a passenger on my aircraft," Langston replied. "But Captain Harmon, I want you to understand something, and I want you to listen very carefully because you will never unhear what I am about to tell you." The cabin was so quiet that Naomi could hear the electrical hum of the overhead bins. "You didn't just assault a passenger, Captain. You assaulted the owner of this airline." Owner. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Ripples of shock spread through the cabin. The businessman in 3A slowly sat back in his seat, his mouth open. Margaret Ashby in 2C pressed her hand to her chest. A younger passenger in row 4, a man who had been recording on his phone since the moment Harmon raised his voice, nearly dropped the device. "That's impossible," Harmon whispered. "That's absolutely impossible. She's a kid. She's wearing a sweatshirt. She can't—" "Ms. Naomi Carter is the founder and controlling shareholder of Pinnacle Equity Partners," Langston said. And now he was speaking not just to Harmon, but to the entire cabin, to every witness, to the record that was being created in real time. 5 days ago, Pinnacle Equity acquired 71% controlling interest in Atlantic Pacific Airways. Ms. Carter personally authorized a $900 million investment that saved this airline from bankruptcy. She saved 38,000 jobs, Captain, including yours. Or rather, including what used to be yours. Harmon grabbed the bulkhead. His legs were giving out. The blood had drained from his face so completely that he looked like a corpse standing upright. $900 million. This girl in the Howard University hoodie had spent $900 million to buy the airline he had been flying for 3 decades, and he had slapped her across the face and called her refuse. "Naomi," Langston said, his voice shifting from cold authority to genuine concern. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, David. I need you to tell me what you want, whatever it is, whatever you need. Full authority, complete restructuring. Name it." Naomi looked at Harmon. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Clinical, thorough, already planning the operation. "Ground the plane," she said. "Cancel the flight. Nobody leaves this aircraft until every witness has been interviewed and every piece of evidence has been documented." "Done. Tower has been notified. The aircraft is under lockdown. I want Port Authority police. I want federal investigators. Assault on a commercial aircraft is a federal crime, David. I want FBI. Already called. They're mobilizing now. And David," Naomi paused, let the silence build, "I want you here, in person, on this plane, within the hour." "I'm already in my car," Langston replied. "I'll be at JFK in 35 minutes. Naomi ended the call. She placed the cracked phone in her lap and looked up at Captain Douglas Harmon with the patience of a woman who had all the time in the world. "I told you," she said quietly. "You had no idea who I am." Harmon couldn't speak. His jaw was working, but nothing was coming out. His brain was trying to process what had just happened, and failing completely. The synapses were firing, but the connections weren't forming. Owner, $900 million. Pinnacle Equity. Ms. Carter. The words tumbled through his mind like wreckage after an explosion. "This can't be real," he finally managed. "You're 27 years old. You look like, you dress like..." "Like what, Captain?" Naomi asked. "Like someone who doesn't deserve respect? Like someone who couldn't possibly have earned her place?" I wasn't trying to..." "You called me refuse." Naomi's voice was quiet, but each word landed like a hammer. "You accused me of stealing a credit card. You told me to go to the back of the plane where I belong. You grabbed my arm. You destroyed my property. And then you hit me in the face." She touched her swollen lip. "Which part of that weren't you trying to do?" Margaret Ashby in 2C began to clap. The sound was slow and deliberate, each clap spaced exactly 2 seconds apart. It was the kind of applause that wasn't celebrating anything. It was punctuating something, marking the end of something. One by one, the other passengers joined in. The businessman in 3A, the couple in row 5, the young man in row 4 who was still recording everything on his phone. Rachel Torres stepped out of the galley. Her face was streaked with tears, and her hands were still trembling, but she walked over to Naomi's seat and stood beside it. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence spoke for her. She was choosing a side. "Miss Mitchell. Carter," Rachel corrected herself, her voice shaking. "Can I get you some ice? For your face?" "Thank you, Rachel. That would be nice." The normalcy of the exchange, a flight attendant offering ice to a passenger, was somehow the most devastating moment of all, because it highlighted the absurdity of everything that had come before. This was all it ever needed to be. A passenger in her seat, a flight attendant doing her job. Simple human decency. Harmon hadn't moved. He was still gripping the bulkhead, staring at Naomi with the glazed expression of a man watching his life burn down in real time. Behind him, First Officer Kyle Bennett emerged from the cockpit. Bennett was younger, early 30s, with the clean-cut look of a man who still believed that doing things right mattered. "Captain," Bennett said, his voice was tight. "Tower just confirmed. We're grounded. Full stop. Port Authority is en route. They're saying FBI field agents are being dispatched from the federal building downtown." FBI? Harmon repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. "Assault on a commercial aircraft is a federal crime, Captain. You know that. You've been trained on that every year for 30 years. "I was maintaining order on my aircraft," Harmon said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. They were the words of a man who was still trying to build a defense out of rubble. "You hit a passenger," Bennett said. The first officer's voice carried a weight that surprised everyone in the cabin, including himself. "You hit a woman who was sitting in her assigned seat with a valid ticket, and you did it because she was black and wearing a hoodie." I was in the cockpit, Captain, but I heard everything. Every word. Harmon turned on his first officer with the reflex of a man who was used to pulling rank. Watch your tone, Bennett. I'm still your commanding officer. No, sir. Bennett shook his head slowly. You're not. You were fired 4 minutes ago. Right now, you're a civilian standing on an aircraft that doesn't want you here. And in about 15 minutes, you're going to be a civilian in handcuffs. The words landed. Harmon's shoulders sagged. The posture of authority that he had worn for 30 years collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. He looked old now, smaller. The silver hair that had seemed distinguished 10 minutes ago now just looked gray. Senator Whitfield chose this moment to attempt a strategic retreat. He picked up his briefcase and began moving toward the cabin door with the practiced casualness of a politician leaving a press conference before the hard questions started. Senator, Naomi's voice stopped him like a wall. Whitfield froze with his briefcase in one hand and his suit jacket draped over the other. He didn't turn around. I have nothing to do with this situation, young lady. I was simply a bystander. I should get out of the way and let the professionals handle. Turn around, Gerald. The use of his first name hit Whitfield like cold water. He turned slowly, his political smile already forming on his face. The smile of a man who had talked his way out of worse situations than this. Ms. Carter, I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. What happened to you was terrible, inexcusable. And I want you to know that I will be speaking to the airline's management about you watched him hit me. Naomi's voice was flat. No anger, no accusation, just fact. You were standing 5 feet away. You watched a uniformed airline captain assault a female passenger, and you said nothing. You did nothing. I was in shock. It happened so fast, I didn't realize. You called me refuse, Senator, before he hit me. Harmon called me refuse, and you laughed. Whitfield's political smile cracked. I don't recall using that specific. It's on video, Gerald. Naomi nodded toward the young man in row 4, who was still holding his phone up. Every second of it, every word you said, every word you didn't say, every moment you stood there and watched. The blood drained from Whitfield's face. In 22 years of politics, he had survived scandals, investigations, and opposition research campaigns, but he had never been caught on video laughing while a black woman was being assaulted. There was no spinning that. There was no surviving that. Sit down, Naomi said. You're not going anywhere until the investigators arrive. And Senator, your campaign received $250,000 from Ridgeline Holdings last quarter. Whitfield blinked. I don't see what that has to do with. Ridgeline Holdings is a subsidiary of Pinnacle Equity Partners, my company. That makes you, in a very direct and very documented sense, someone whose career I have invested in. The color left Whitfield's face entirely. He sat down in the nearest available seat without another word. Through the aircraft windows, red and blue lights began to pulse across the tarmac. 3 Port Authority police cruisers, 2 unmarked federal vehicles, a black executive SUV that Harmon recognized as the company car assigned to the CEO's office. They were all converging on gate B31. That'll be David, Naomi said, glancing at the lights. And police, and probably the FBI, since this is a federal matter. Harmon heard himself make a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. My pension, he said. I'm 6 months from retirement. I have $3.2 million in that account. 30 years of contributions. Naomi looked at him. For the first time since the confrontation began, something that might have been pity flickered across her expression. But it was gone in less than a second. Your contract includes a morality clause, Captain Harmon. Termination with cause for gross misconduct voids all pension benefits. You know this. You signed it. The union will fight it, Harmon said, grasping at the last thread of hope he could find. The pilots' union will file grievances. They'll protect my rights. The Atlantic Pacific Pilots Union Pension Fund is managed by Meridian Financial Services, Naomi said. She let that sentence sit in the air for a moment before she delivered the next one. Meridian Financial Services is a subsidiary of Pinnacle Equity Partners. Harmon stared at her. I own the company that manages your union's retirement money, Captain. How long do you think your grievance is going to take?" The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the jet bridge. Multiple people, walking fast. Authoritative footfalls on metal flooring. The cabin door opened wider, and David Langston stepped aboard. He was a distinguished man in his 50s. Dark suit, slightly rumpled, tie loosened. He had the look of someone who had jumped out of his chair and run to his car without stopping to check a mirror. His eyes swept the cabin once, fast and sharp, and locked onto Naomi. Langston walked past Harmon without looking at him. He walked past Senator Whitfield without acknowledging his existence. He went straight to seat 1A and crouched beside Naomi's seat, lowering himself to her eye level in a gesture that every single person in that cabin understood. This man, the CEO of the airline, was kneeling in front of the woman in the hoodie. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice thick with something that sounded like it was breaking, "I cannot begin to tell you how sorry I am. This is unconscionable. This should never have happened on any aircraft. The fact that it happened to you, on your own airline, while you were conducting an investigation that was designed to prevent exactly this kind of behavior." His voice cracked. He stopped, composed himself. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I have paramedics outside." "I'm fine, David." Naomi's voice was steady, but softer now than it had been during the confrontation. "But we need to talk about what happened here today. Not just to me. What happened to Rachel. What this says about the culture we inherited." "Whatever you need," Langston said. "Whatever changes. Full authority. Complete restructuring." He stood and turned to face Harmon. For a moment, the two men looked at each other. Langston, who had hired Harmon 8 years ago. Harmon, who had shaken Langston's hand at the company Christmas party 4 months ago. They had been colleagues. Now they were on opposite sides of a line that could never be erased. "Officers," Langston said, addressing the 2 Port Authority police who had entered the cabin behind him. "This is Captain Douglas Harmon. Approximately 25 minutes ago, he physically assaulted Ms. Carter. There are multiple witnesses. The incident is recorded on video. It occurred on a commercial aircraft at a federal facility." The taller officer, a man with graying hair and 20 years of experience etched into his face, stepped forward. His name tag read, Chen. He moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Sir," Officer Chen said, "I'm with Port Authority Police. You're under arrest for assault in the 2nd degree. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." Harmon looked at the handcuffs. He looked at Naomi. He looked at the other passengers who were all watching in complete silence. He looked at Rachel Torres, who was standing beside Naomi's seat holding a bag of ice, tears still wet on her cheeks. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," Harmon said quietly. I was maintaining standards. I was protecting the integrity of first class." Officer Chen placed the handcuffs around Harmon's wrists. The metallic click echoed through the cabin with a finality that made several passengers flinch. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Harmon barely heard the words. His eyes were still fixed on Naomi. "Who are you?" he whispered. Not the question of a man demanding credentials, the question of a man trying to understand how completely he had misjudged the world. Naomi stood up from her seat. She was still wearing the hoodie, still wearing the ripped jeans and the scuffed Converse, still looking like a 20-year-old college student. But every person in that cabin could see it now. The way she carried herself, the quiet authority that radiated from her like heat from a furnace. How had they not seen it before? How had Harmon not seen it? "I'm Naomi Carter," she said. "I grew up in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. My grandmother raised me after my parents died in a fire when I was 8. I went to MIT on a full scholarship because I worked harder than anyone else in my school while holding down 2 jobs. I built Pinnacle Equity from nothing, and 5 days ago, I bought this airline because I believed it was worth saving." She took one step closer to Harmon. "I sat in this seat today because I wanted to see with my own eyes how this airline treats its passengers. I wanted to know if the discrimination reports I'd been receiving for 6 months were real." She paused. "Now I know." Margaret Ashby began to clap again. Slow, steady. One by one, the cabin followed. The applause built until it filled the enclosed space like thunder. It followed Harmon as the officers turned him toward the door. It followed him as he walked past the other first-class passengers who wouldn't meet his eyes. It followed him down the jet bridge, growing fainter with each step, but never stopping. Rachel Torres placed the bag of ice gently against Naomi's swollen cheek. "I'm so sorry," Rachel whispered. "I should have done more. I should have stood in front of you. I should have—" "Rachel," Naomi took her hand. "You tried. In a room full of powerful people, you were the only one who tried. That took more courage than you know." Rachel broke down completely. 7 years of swallowing her voice. 7 years of watching passengers be mistreated and being told it wasn't her place to intervene. 7 years of smiling through abuse because that was the job. It all came out in that moment, in that grip between her hand and Naomi's. Outside, the flashing lights multiplied. More vehicles, more officials. The investigation was beginning. And somewhere in the back of the aircraft, 312 economy passengers who had no idea what had just happened in first class were checking their watches and wondering why the plane hadn't moved. Naomi pressed the ice to her face and picked up her cracked phone with her other hand. She had 14 missed calls, 8 text messages, 3 emails marked urgent. The machinery of corporate crisis response was already spinning at full speed. But before she dealt with any of it, she opened her text messages and typed one line to her grandmother in Brooklyn. "You were right, Grandma. They stopped watching. And I made my move." Ruth Carter's reply came back 11 seconds later. "That's my baby girl. Now make them remember your name." Ruth Carter's text burned in Naomi's mind as she sat in seat 1A with a bag of ice pressed against her swollen face. Make them remember your name. She intended to. But first, she needed to understand exactly how deep the rot went. Because what happened today wasn't about one pilot. It was about a system that had created him, protected him, and rewarded him for 30 years. David Langston was standing in the galley, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders at someone in the Manhattan headquarters. His tie was completely loose now, hanging around his neck like a noose. He had been CEO of Atlantic Pacific for 8 years, and in the span of 40 minutes, his entire tenure had been called into question. He knew it. Naomi could see it in the way his hands shook every time he lowered the phone. "David," Naomi called from her seat. "Hang up." Langston ended the call mid-sentence. He walked over and stood in front of her, and Naomi noticed that he couldn't quite meet her eyes. That told her something. Guilt looked different on every person, but it always showed up in the same place. The eyes. "I need Captain Harmon's personnel file," Naomi said. "Everything. Performance reviews, passenger complaints, disciplinary actions, internal memos, anything with his name on it. I need it within the hour." "I'll have HR pull it immediately." "No," Naomi shook her head. "HR has had 30 years to pull it. I want your head of legal to personally compile the file and send it directly to my encrypted email. Nobody in HR touches it. Nobody filters it. Nobody decides what I should and shouldn't see." Langston swallowed hard. "Naomi, I want you to know that I had no idea this kind of behavior was—" "Don't." Naomi held up her hand. "Don't tell me what you didn't know. Tell me what you did know. Tell me how many complaints were filed against Harmon. Tell me how many were investigated. Tell me how many resulted in disciplinary action." Langston stood there for a long time. The hum of the aircraft's electrical system filled the silence between them. Outside, the red and blue lights still pulsed across the tarmac, and federal investigators were setting up an interview station in the jet bridge. "I don't know the exact numbers," Langston finally said. "Guess." He closed his eyes. "There were complaints. I know there were complaints. I remember seeing summaries in quarterly reports. Passenger relations would flag certain names that appeared repeatedly. And what happened to those flags? They were reviewed by the operations team and resolved internally." "Resolved how?" Another silence, longer this time. Langston opened his eyes and for the first time looked directly at Naomi. What she saw in his face wasn't just guilt, it was shame. The deep, bone-level shame of a man who was realizing that his own passivity had helped create the monster that had just struck her across the face. "Most of them were settled," he said. upgraded tickets, mileage credits, in some cases financial compensation with non-disclosure agreements. You paid people to be quiet. The legal team recommended it as the most cost-effective resolution. How much? Over 30 years? Across all employees with repeat complaints? Langston ran his hand over his face. I'd have to check, but probably somewhere in the range of $12 to $15 million. Naomi let that number sit in the air. $15 million spent not to fix the problem, but to hide it. $15 million to ensure that men like Douglas Harmon could keep wearing their 4 stripes and their arrogance and their untouchable authority for another year, another decade, another career. 12 to 15 million, Naomi repeated, to protect men who treat passengers like garbage. To protect the airline from litigation, Langston corrected, then immediately wished he hadn't. The distinction he was trying to draw collapsed under its own weight the moment it left his mouth. Those are the same thing, David, and you know it. An FBI field agent named Patricia Walsh boarded the aircraft at 11:42. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with short brown hair and the kind of face that gave away absolutely nothing. She had been with the Bureau for 19 years, and she specialized in federal crimes on commercial aircraft. She had seen ugly things in her career. But the video that the young man in row 4 had already uploaded to a secure evidence server made her jaw tighten in a way that her colleagues would later describe as the angriest they had ever seen her. Ms. Carter, Walsh said, approaching seat 1A with her credentials displayed, I'm Special Agent Patricia Walsh, FBI. I need to take your statement. I also need to photograph your injuries. Of course. Naomi removed the ice pack. The left side of her face was swollen and discolored. The split lip had stopped bleeding but was crusted and angry. Walsh photographed the injuries from 4 angles without comment, but her eyes told a different story. Can you walk me through what happened, starting from when you boarded the aircraft? Naomi told the story. She told it the same way she had told David Langston on the phone. Clear, factual, no embellishment. She started with Diane Kessler at the gate and ended with the handcuffs clicking around Harmon's wrists. She included every word he had said, every word the senator had said, every word Rachel had tried to say before being silenced. Walsh took notes without interrupting. When Naomi finished, the agent looked up from her notepad. Ms. Carter, I have to ask, are you aware that Captain Harmon claims you provoked him by refusing to comply with a lawful order from the aircraft commander? I'm aware that's what he'll claim, Naomi said. I'm also aware that the aircraft was parked at the gate with the door open. The engines were off and passengers were still boarding. There was no lawful order. There was no safety concern. There was a man who didn't like the color of my skin sitting in a seat he wanted to give to his friend. Walsh nodded slowly. The video corroborates your account completely. I should tell you that based on what I've seen, this is likely going to be charged as a federal hate crime in addition to the assault charge. Naomi hadn't expected that. She sat still for a moment, processing. A federal hate crime. That carried significantly more weight than simple assault. It meant investigators would examine Harmon's entire history, his emails, his text messages, his social media, every interaction he had ever had with a passenger who didn't look like him. Do what you need to do, Naomi said. I'll cooperate fully. Walsh moved on to interview the other witnesses. Margaret Ashby in 2C gave her statement with the crisp precision of a woman who had spent 40 years as a federal judge before retiring. She described Harmon's behavior as the most disgraceful display of prejudice she had witnessed since the civil rights era. The businessman in 3A, whose name was Robert Chen, no relation to the arresting officer, provided a detailed timeline that matched Naomi's account almost word for word. The young man in row 4, a graduate student named Marcus Williams, turned over his phone with the complete video recording, 9 minutes and 47 seconds of footage that captured everything from Harmon's first demand for Naomi's boarding pass to the moment the handcuffs were placed on his wrists. It's already backed up to 3 cloud servers, Marcus told Agent Walsh, and I sent a copy to my attorney before the police even got here. Walsh almost smiled. Almost. Rachel Torres gave her statement through tears that wouldn't stop falling. She described how she had tried to intervene and been shut down, how she had felt powerless, how she had watched a passenger be assaulted by her own captain and been unable to stop it. "He told me my job was to serve drinks and smile," Rachel said, her voice breaking on every other word. "He said to leave command decisions to people who actually know what they're doing. And the worst part is, Agent Walsh, the worst part is that this wasn't the first time." Walsh looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been flying with Captain Harmon on and off for 3 years. I've seen him do this before. Not the hitting, but everything else. The profiling, the questioning, the forcing passengers to move seats because he decided they didn't belong. He did it to a Middle Eastern family last March on the Chicago route. He did it to an elderly black gentleman on the Miami run in January. He did it to a young Indian couple on the London flight 6 months ago." "Did you report these incidents?" Rachel let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I filed reports after the Chicago incident, went through the proper channels, filled out the forms, submitted everything to passenger relations." "And what happened?" "Nothing. I got a form email saying the matter had been reviewed and resolved. 2 weeks later, I was reassigned from the London route, which I had been flying for 4 years, to a domestic schedule. Short hops, Newark to Charlotte, JFK to Atlanta. My seniority was reset on the new routes. I lost my per diem differential. I lost $8,000 in annual income." Walsh stopped writing. "Are you telling me you were punished for filing a complaint against Captain Harmon?" "Nobody ever said that's what it was," Rachel replied. "They called it a scheduling optimization. But every flight attendant in the system understood the message. You don't report the captains. You don't challenge the pilots. You smile and serve drinks and keep your mouth shut." Naomi had been listening to Rachel's interview from her seat. She hadn't moved. She hadn't spoken. But her hands were gripping the armrest so hard that her knuckles had gone white. This was worse than she had anticipated. This wasn't just a culture problem. This was a system of organized retaliation designed to protect abusers and silence whistleblowers. At 12:15, Langston's phone buzzed with an encrypted email from the head of legal. Harmon's personnel file. Langston opened it on his tablet, scanned the first page, and his face went gray. "How bad?" Naomi asked. Langston walked over and handed her the tablet without a word. Naomi scrolled through the file. 47 formal passenger complaints in 30 years. 47. Allegations of racial profiling, verbal abuse, intimidation, unauthorized seat reassignments, and hostile treatment of minority passengers. The complaints spanned 3 decades and covered routes across 4 continents. And every single one had been marked resolved with the same notation, settled through passenger relations, no further action required. 47, Naomi said quietly. "I know," Langston replied. 47 people told you something was wrong, David. 47 human beings took the time to write a formal complaint, which most people never do because they know nothing will happen. And they were right. Nothing happened. 47 times. Langston had no answer. There was no answer. Naomi kept scrolling. She found the performance reviews. Every single year, for 30 years, Harmon had received ratings of exceeds expectations or outstanding. His supervisors praised his professionalism, his command presence, his dedication to maintaining high standards in the premium cabin. Not one review mentioned the complaints. Not one review flagged his behavior as a concern. His supervisors knew, Naomi said. They had to know. You can't receive 47 complaints in 30 years and have your supervisors not know. The complaint system was siloed, Langston said. Passenger relations handled complaints separately from flight operations. The 2 departments didn't share information. By accident or by design? Langston couldn't answer that either. Naomi found something else in the file, a memo from 2019 written by Harmon's direct supervisor, a chief pilot named Walter Briggs. The memo was addressed to the vice president of flight operations, and it read, "Captain Harmon continues to generate occasional passenger friction, particularly on international premium routes. However, his safety record is impeccable and his experience is invaluable. Recommend continued assignment to high-profile routes with a note to passenger relations to handle any complaints through standard settlement protocols." Occasional passenger friction. That was what they called it. A man terrorizing passengers based on their race was occasional passenger friction, and the recommended solution was to pay people off and keep flying him. "Where is Walter Briggs now?" Naomi asked. "He retired 2 years ago," Langston said. "Full pension, full benefits." "Get me his address." Langston hesitated. "Naomi, I'm not sure what you're planning, but Walter is retired. He's no longer with the company." "He retired with a full pension from an airline that I now own, David. That pension includes a morality clause identical to the one in Harmon's contract. If Briggs knowingly concealed misconduct to protect an abusive employee, his benefits are subject to review. Get me his address." Langston made the call. At 1:30 in the afternoon, nearly 4 hours after Harmon's arrest, the other passengers were finally allowed to deplane. They were escorted through the terminal by Port Authority officers and directed to a rebooking counter, where Atlantic Pacific staff scrambled to find alternative flights to London. Most passengers went quietly. A few stopped to shake Naomi's hand on their way out. Margaret Ashby paused at the cabin door and looked back. "Young lady," she said, "what you did today took extraordinary courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." "Thank you, Margaret. And for what it's worth," the elderly woman added, her eyes sharp behind her glasses, "I sat on the federal bench for 40 years. What that man did to you today will cost him everything. And it should." Marcus Williams, the graduate student who had recorded the video, was the last witness to deplane. He approached Naomi's seat with his phone in his hand. "Ms. Carter, I want you to know that I've secured the video evidence with my attorney. It's time-stamped, unedited, and backed up in multiple locations. If you need it for court proceedings, civil litigation, or public disclosure, it's available." "Thank you, Marcus. That video may end up being the most important 9 minutes of footage in aviation history." Marcus paused at the door. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "When he hit you, when he actually struck you across the face, why didn't you react? How did you stay so calm?" Naomi was quiet for a moment. She touched her swollen lip gently with her index finger, feeling the rough edge of the cut that was already beginning to scab over. "My grandmother taught me something when I was 9 years old," she said. "She said that powerful people expect you to crumble. They expect tears. They expect submission. They expect you to confirm every assumption they've already made about you. The most dangerous thing you can do to someone who thinks they have power over you is to refuse to give them the reaction they're waiting for." Marcus nodded slowly. "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman. She scrubbed office floors for 41 years so I could go to college. She's the most remarkable person I've ever known." After Marcus left, the aircraft was empty except for Naomi, Langston, Agent Walsh, and 2 federal investigators who were still documenting evidence. Rachel Torres had been told she could leave, but she had refused. She sat in the galley, waiting. She told Agent Walsh that she wasn't leaving until Ms. Carter left. Naomi spent the next 2 hours working from seat 1A. She had her cracked phone in one hand and Langston's tablet in the other, and she was building something. Not a report. Not a memo. Something bigger. At 3:45, she called an emergency meeting. Langston arranged a conference call with every senior executive at Atlantic Pacific Airways. 14 people on the line. The heads of operations, legal, human resources, training, customer relations, flight operations, ground operations, international services, and the company's general counsel. "My name is Naomi Carter," she began, and the silence on the line was absolute. "Most of you don't know who I am. As of 5 days ago, I am the majority owner of this airline. Today, I was physically assaulted by one of your captains while seated in first class on flight AP508. The assault was racially motivated, and it was the direct result of a corporate culture that has tolerated and rewarded discrimination for decades." She paused. Let the words land. "In the next 72 hours, I'm going to ask each of you a simple question. What did you know, and when did you know it? Your answers will determine whether you still have a job at the end of the week. I suggest you spend tonight being very honest with yourselves." She ended the call. Langston stood beside her, his face the color of old paper. "Naomi, some of those people have been with the company for 20 years. If you terminate senior leadership across the board, the operational disruption could what, David? Could be worse than a captain slapping a passenger in the face? Could be worse than 47 buried complaints? Could be worse than a system that punishes flight attendants for doing the right thing? I'm just saying that we need to think about stability. Stability. Naomi stood up from her seat. She had been sitting for nearly 5 hours, and her body ached. Her face throbbed. The cut on her lip pulled every time she spoke. But her voice carried the kind of force that made David Langston, a man who ran a 38,000-employee company, take a step backward. Your stable system created Douglas Harmon. Your stable system buried 47 complaints. Your stable system punished Rachel Torres for filing a report. Your stable system let a United States senator stand 5 feet away from an assault and say nothing because he assumed the victim wasn't important enough to protect. She picked up her backpack from the overhead bin, the same beat-up canvas bag she had carried through the terminal that morning. She slung it over her shoulder. I didn't spend $900 million to buy a stable system, David. I spent it to burn the old one down and build something better. You have 72 hours to decide if you want to help me build it or if you'd rather join Harmon on the way out. She walked past him toward the cabin door. Naomi, Langston called after her. She stopped but didn't turn around. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you're right, about all of it. And I'm sorry. I should have seen it. I should have fixed it. I didn't. Naomi turned her head slightly. That's the first honest thing you've said to me all day, David. She walked down the jet bridge alone. Her sneakers made soft sounds on the metal floor. Her face was swollen, her lip was cut, her phone was cracked, but her back was straight and her eyes were clear, and she was already planning the next 72 hours in her mind. Behind her, Rachel Torres emerged from the galley, wiping her eyes one last time. She looked at Langston. Is she always like that? Rachel asked. Langston let out a long breath. I've known her for 5 months. She bought a dying airline for $900 million without anyone finding out. She flew undercover for 6 months documenting discrimination. She took a slap to the face from a man twice her size and never blinked. And she just told 14 senior executives that their jobs depend on their honesty. He looked at Rachel with the expression of a man who was seeing the future and wasn't sure he was ready for it. No, Rachel, I don't think she's always like that. I think today she was being gentle. At 4:27 that afternoon, Naomi Carter walked out of JFK Terminal 4 into the October sunlight. She had been on that aircraft for 7 hours. She had not made it to London. She had not completed her reconnaissance mission. But she had accomplished something far more important. She had seen the truth. Not in a report, not in a memo, not through the sanitized lens of a corporate audit. She had felt it on her face, in her blood. In the ringing silence of a cabin full of people who had watched a man try to break her and failed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her grandmother. You coming home for dinner? I made pot roast. Naomi smiled, and the cut on her lip opened again, and she tasted blood, and she didn't care. On my way, Grandma. Save me a plate. Always do, baby girl. Always do. Naomi didn't sleep that night. She sat at her grandmother's kitchen table in the one-bedroom apartment on Linden Boulevard, the same apartment she had grown up in, the same table where she had done her homework by candlelight when the electricity got cut off. And she worked. Ruth Carter had wrapped a bag of frozen peas in a dish towel and pressed it against Naomi's face before going to bed, the way she had done when Naomi came home with a black eye from a schoolyard fight at age 10. Some things never changed. The remedy for the world's cruelty was still frozen vegetables and a grandmother's hands. By 2 a.m, Naomi had read every page of Douglas Harmon's personnel file, all 412 pages, and what she found made her sick. The 47 complaints were just the ones that had been formally filed. Buried in the appendices, she discovered references to an additional 61 informal resolutions, incidents that had been handled verbally by station managers and never entered into the official complaint system. That meant over 100 passengers had reported Harmon's behavior across 3 decades, and the company's response had been the same every single time. Pay, silence, forget. But it was the last document in the file that stopped Naomi cold. A memo dated January 14th, 2022, 3 years ago, from the company's general counsel, a man named Philip Rourke. The memo was addressed to David Langston personally and marked confidential. It read, Re Captain D. Harmon, ongoing liability exposure. David, passenger complaints against Harmon have reached a level that presents significant legal exposure. Recommend quiet separation with full pension and NDA. If Harmon remains in active service and a high-profile incident occurs, the company's liability could be catastrophic. This is a ticking time bomb. Langston had received that memo 3 years ago. He had been personally warned that Harmon was dangerous, that an incident was inevitable, that the company was sitting on a bomb. And he had done nothing. Naomi stared at the memo for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car alarm went off somewhere on Linden Boulevard and then stopped. Ruth snored softly in the bedroom. The frozen peas had melted. Naomi's face throbbed. She picked up her phone and typed a message to David Langston. 2 words. I know. She didn't explain what she knew. She didn't need to. Langston would understand the moment he read it, and he would spend the rest of the night the same way Naomi was spending hers. Wide awake, terrified. At 6 a.m, Naomi showered, changed into a black t-shirt and jeans, kissed her grandmother on the forehead, and took a car to the Atlantic Pacific Airways headquarters on 6th Avenue in Manhattan. She didn't call ahead. She didn't schedule a meeting. She walked through the lobby at 6:45, past the security desk, past the receptionist who didn't recognize her, and into the elevator. She pressed the button for the 42nd floor, executive suite. The floor was nearly empty at that hour. A few early arrivals were sitting at their desks with coffee cups, scrolling through overnight emails. They glanced at the young black woman in jeans and a t-shirt walking past their offices and assumed she was a courier or a cleaning crew member. Nobody stopped her. Nobody asked for identification. Nobody questioned why she was heading straight for the CEO's corner office. David Langston was already there. He was sitting behind his desk in yesterday's suit, which told Naomi he hadn't gone home. His eyes were red, his tie was gone. There were 3 empty coffee cups on his desk, and his laptop was open to what appeared to be his resignation letter. Naomi walked in and closed the door behind her. You got my message, she said. Langston nodded. He looked like a man who had been punched in the stomach and was still waiting to exhale. The Rourke memo, he said, January 2022. January 2022, 3 years ago. You were personally warned that Douglas Harmon was a liability, that a high-profile incident was inevitable, that the company's exposure was catastrophic. Philip Rourke used the phrase ticking time bomb. And you did nothing. I should have acted. I know that. Why didn't you? Langston leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. Do you want the honest answer or the answer I've been telling myself for 3 years? Try the honest one. Harmon was connected. His brother-in-law is on the pilot's union board. His college roommate is the head of the FAA's certification division. His father was a retired admiral who still played golf with half the transportation committee. Removing Harmon would have triggered a union grievance, political blowback, and media attention that the airline couldn't afford. We were already bleeding money. We were already in trouble. I made the calculation that the risk of keeping him was lower than the risk of removing him. You made a calculation, Naomi repeated. I made the wrong calculation. I know that. Naomi sat down across from him. She didn't sit in the chair that visitors normally used, the one positioned slightly lower than the CEO's desk, to create a subtle power dynamic. She pulled over the chair from the small conference table, the one that was the same height as Langston's, and sat directly across from him at eye level. David, how many other ticking time bombs are in this company? Langston closed his eyes. I don't know. That's not good enough. I know it's not. I want a full audit. Every employee with more than 3 formal complaints in the past 10 years, every informal resolution, every NDA that was signed to make a discrimination complaint disappear, every reassignment that happened within 60 days of a crew member filing a report. I want the complete picture. That will take weeks. You have 72 hours. You have 64 left. Langston opened his eyes and looked at the resignation letter on his laptop screen. Naomi, I drafted this at 3 in the morning. I think it might be best for the company if I step aside. Let you bring in someone clean, someone who doesn't have my baggage. Naomi looked at the letter on the screen. She was quiet for a moment, and Langston couldn't read her expression. He had seen her face down a pilot twice her size without blinking. He had watched her dismantle a senator with 3 sentences. But right now, in this quiet office at 7 in the morning, he couldn't tell if she was about to accept his resignation or reject it. Do you believe this company can change, David? Yes. Do you believe you can be part of that change? He hesitated. I want to be, but after what I allowed to happen, I'm not asking what you allowed. I'm asking what you're willing to do now. Langston swallowed. Whatever it takes. Then close the resignation letter. I don't want your resignation. I want your commitment. Resignations are easy, David. They're the coward's way out. You stay. You face what you allowed. You help me fix it. And you live with the knowledge that it should have been fixed 3 years ago. That's your punishment. Not walking away, staying and doing the work. Langston stared at her. In 30 years of corporate life, no one had ever spoken to him like that. No board member, no investor, no regulator. This 27-year-old woman in a black t-shirt had just handed him the heaviest sentence of his career. And it wasn't termination. It was accountability. Okay, he said. I'll stay. Good. Now call Philip Rourke. I want him in this office in 1 hour. Philip Rourke arrived at 8:15. He was a tall, thin man in his late 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and the permanently nervous expression of a lawyer who had spent his career keeping secrets that wanted to come out. He walked into Langston's office expecting a routine meeting about the Harmon incident. He was not expecting the young woman sitting in the CEO's chair. Naomi had moved. Langston was now sitting in the visitor's chair. Naomi was behind the desk. She hadn't asked permission. She hadn't needed to. Philip, Langston said, this is Naomi Carter. She's the majority owner of Atlantic Pacific Airways. Rourke's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions. Confusion, recognition, fear. The fear settled in and stayed. Ms. Carter, I want to assure you that the legal department has been cooperating fully with the federal investigation and that we are prepared to... January 14th, 2022, Naomi said. Rourke stopped talking. His mouth hung open for a moment before he closed it. You wrote a memo to David on January 14th, 2022. You described Captain Douglas Harmon as a ticking time bomb. You recommended his quiet removal with full pension and a non-disclosure agreement. You warned that a high-profile incident could result in catastrophic liability. Rourke's eyes darted to Langston, who was staring at the floor. David didn't act on your recommendation, Naomi continued. But here's what interests me, Philip. After David ignored your memo, what did you do? The decision was above my pay grade, Ms. Carter. The CEO chose to retain Captain Harmon, and you filed the memo, moved on, and kept collecting your salary. I raised the concern through proper channels. That's my role as general counsel. I advise. I don't decide. You're the chief legal officer of a company that was sitting on 100 passenger complaints against a single employee, and your contribution was one memo that you allowed to be ignored. Rourke's face was shining with sweat. Ms. Carter, I want to be very careful about what I say here because there are potential litigation implications. Let me help you with that, Naomi said. Here's what you're going to say. You're going to tell me how many other employees in this airline have complaint profiles similar to Douglas Harmon's? You're going to tell me how many NDAs have been executed to silence discrimination victims. And you're going to tell me the total dollar amount that Atlantic Pacific Airways has spent over the past decade to cover up misconduct by its employees. I'd need time to compile that information. You have 1 hour. Ms. Carter, that's not realistic. The legal department would need to review thousands of files across multiple jurisdictions. Philip, Naomi leaned forward. Yesterday, one of your pilots slapped me across the face on an aircraft that I own in front of witnesses, while a United States senator watched and did nothing. I have a split lip, a bruised face, and a 9-minute video that will be on every news channel in America by tomorrow morning. You do not have the luxury of telling me what is and isn't realistic. Rourke looked at Langston one more time. Langston didn't return the look. 1 hour, Rourke said. I'll have something. He was back in 53 minutes. The file he carried was thick. Naomi read it standing up, leaning against the window of the 42nd floor, while Langston and Rourke sat in silence and watched her face. The numbers were staggering. In the past decade alone, Atlantic Pacific Airways had executed 217 non-disclosure agreements related to passenger discrimination complaints. The total cost of settlements exceeded $23 million. 31 employees had complaint profiles that matched or exceeded Harmon's pattern. 12 of those employees were still active. 4 were captains. 3 were senior managers at international hubs. 2 were in the training department, which meant they were teaching the next generation of Atlantic Pacific employees. 2 of them are in training, Naomi said quietly. Rourke nodded. The people who are supposed to be teaching new employees how to treat passengers are themselves subjects of repeated discrimination complaints. The training assignments were made based on seniority and technical qualifications, Rourke said. Complaint history was not part of the evaluation criteria. Naomi set the file down on the desk. She pressed both hands flat against the surface and looked at Langston and Rourke with an expression that made both men feel like they were shrinking. 72 hours, she said. That's what I gave you. Here's what's going to happen. Every employee on this list with more than 5 formal complaints is suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation. Every NDA signed in the past 5 years is under review. I'm bringing in an outside legal team to audit the entire complaint process. Your head of human resources, whoever signed off on the settlement protocols that buried these complaints, is terminated today. Sarah Mitchell is the VP of HR, Langston said. She's been with the company for 18 years. Not anymore. Naomi, if we terminate Sarah and suspend 12 employees simultaneously, the union is going to do exactly what I tell them to do, David. Their pension fund is managed by my company. Their collective bargaining agreement is with an airline that I own. If they want to protect employees who assault and discriminate against passengers, they can do it without a pension fund and without an employer. The room fell silent. Rourke was visibly trembling. Langston had gone pale. I also want the London operation audited, Naomi said. I've received separate complaints about the London hub, discriminatory seating policies, profiling at check-in. Crew members instructed to provide differential service based on passenger appearance. The London hub manager is Simon Caldwell, Langston said. Schedule a call with him for this afternoon. Don't tell him what it's about. The call happened at 3:15 Eastern, 8:15 London time. Simon Caldwell answered cheerfully, expecting a routine check-in about quarterly metrics. His cheerfulness lasted about 45 seconds. Mr. Caldwell, Naomi said. I'm Naomi Carter. I'm the new majority owner of Atlantic Pacific Airways. I'm calling to discuss reports I've received about discriminatory practices at the London hub. The silence on Caldwell's end lasted long enough for Naomi to hear him swallow. Ms. Carter, I'm not sure what reports you're referring to. The London hub operates in full compliance with all company policies and UK equality legislation. Then you won't mind explaining why I have testimony from 3 separate ground staff members who say they were instructed to subject certain passengers to additional security screening based on their appearance. That's completely inaccurate. We follow standard security protocols established by the Civil Aviation Authority. I also have testimony from 2 gate agents who describe unofficial seating policies that prioritize seat assignments based on racial profiles. Ms. Carter, I can assure you, and I have a written statement from a flight attendant who says she was told, and I'm quoting directly here, to make sure the front of the cabin stays comfortable for our premium customers. What does comfortable mean, Mr. Caldwell? Another silence, longer this time. Naomi could hear Caldwell breathing. She could hear the gears turning in his head as he calculated his options. Deny everything. Admit something. Blame someone else. The mental math of a man trying to save his career. Ms. Carter, I wouldn't characterize our policies as discriminatory. They're more like guidelines for maintaining the premium experience that our highest-paying customers expect. Guidelines, Naomi repeated. Industry standard practices for customer segmentation and service differentiation. Mr. Caldwell, a captain at JFK, hit me in the face yesterday because he decided I didn't belong in first class. He used almost identical language to what you just said. Premium experience, proper standards, right kind of customer. Are you hearing yourself? Dead silence. You're fired, Mr. Caldwell, effective immediately. HR will contact you within the hour with separation details. Do not enter the hub. Do not contact any employees. Do not access any company systems. You can't. Ms. Carter, I've been with this airline for 22 years. I have a family. I have a mortgage. You can't just... I just did. Goodbye, Mr. Caldwell. She ended the call. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Wednesday, less than 30 hours after the assault on Flight AP-508, Naomi Carter had fired the VP of Human Resources, the London hub manager, the head of the Passenger Relations Department who had overseen the NDA settlement system, and 2 senior managers in the training department who had been flagged in the complaint files. She had suspended 12 employees pending investigation. She had initiated a comprehensive audit of every discrimination complaint filed in the past decade. She had retained an outside law firm, Morrison & Hayes, one of the top employment litigation firms in New York, to conduct an independent review of the company's complaint handling procedures. And she was just getting started. At 6:30, her phone rang. It was Agent Walsh from the FBI. Ms. Carter, I wanted to update you. Captain Harmon was arraigned this afternoon in federal court in Brooklyn. He's been charged with assault in the second degree and assault with a hate crime enhancement under federal law. Bail was set at $250,000. Did he make bail? His wife posted it about an hour ago. He's been released with conditions, surrendered his passport, electronic monitoring, no contact with you or any Atlantic Pacific employees. Naomi nodded. She hadn't expected him to stay in jail. Men like Harmon always found a way to post bail. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was what came next. Agent Walsh, during your investigation of Captain Harmon, did you find anything in his personal devices, emails, messages, anything that suggests this wasn't isolated? Walsh paused. Federal investigators weren't supposed to share details of an ongoing investigation, but something about what she had seen on that aircraft, something about the video and the testimony, and the look on Naomi Carter's face when she wiped blood from her lip, made Walsh decide that some rules existed to be bent. Ms. Carter, I can't share specifics, but I will tell you that what we found on Captain Harmon's personal phone suggests that his behavior was not limited to the aircraft. And I will tell you that some of what we found involves communications with other Atlantic Pacific employees. Naomi's grip tightened on the phone. Other employees were involved? I've said more than I should, but I'd recommend that your internal investigation look very carefully at Harmon's social circle within the company. The people he flew with regularly, the people he spent time with outside of work. What we found suggests a culture, not just an individual. Walsh ended the call. Naomi sat in Langston's office, which she had quietly taken over as her command center, and stared at the wall. A culture, not just an individual. She had suspected it. She had built her entire undercover operation around the suspicion, but hearing it confirmed by the FBI hit differently. She picked up the phone and called David Langston, who had gone home to shower and change for the first time in 36 hours. David, I need Harmon's crew records, every flight he operated in the past 5 years, every first officer, every flight attendant. I want to know who he flew with repeatedly. I want to know who requested to fly with him. And I want to know who filed complaints and who didn't. I'll have it by morning. One more thing. That video from the aircraft, the one Marcus Williams recorded, what about it? Don't fight it. When it goes public, and it will go public, don't try to suppress it. Don't issue a statement saying it doesn't represent our values. Don't hide behind corporate language. What do you want me to say? Naomi was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window of the 42nd floor at the Manhattan skyline. The sun was setting behind the Hudson River, and the sky was turning colors that she didn't have names for. "Tell the truth," she said. "Tell them that our airline failed. Tell them that we had 100 complaints against this man and we did nothing. Tell them that we paid $23 million to make discrimination disappear instead of spending it to make discrimination stop. Tell them that we let this happen, and tell them that starting today, we will never let it happen again." Langston was silent on the other end. "Can you do that, David?" "Yes," he said, "I can do that." "Good, because in about 12 hours, the whole world is going to see what Douglas Harmon did to me. And when they do, I want them to see that we didn't run from it. I want them to see that we ran toward it." She ended the call and sat alone in the empty office. The building was quiet. The cleaning crew was working 3 floors below. She could hear the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner through the ventilation system. Her face throbbed. Her lip was still swollen. The bruise on her cheek had deepened to a purple that she knew would photograph spectacularly when the press eventually found her. She opened her phone and pulled up the text thread with her grandmother. "Still at the office, might be late." Ruth's reply came back in seconds. The woman was 81 years old and texted faster than most teenagers. "Pot roast is in the fridge. Don't forget to eat. And baby girl?" "Yes, Grandma? I saw on the news what that man did to you. They're showing the video everywhere. I watched it 3 times. You didn't even flinch. You know who you looked like?" "Who?" "Your mother." She never flinched either. Not once in her whole life. Naomi put the phone down and pressed her hands against her eyes. For the first time since Douglas Harmon's hand had connected with her face, she cried. Not because of the pain, not because of the humiliation, but because her mother had been dead for 19 years, and her grandmother had just given her the only thing that all the money in the world couldn't buy. She cried for exactly 90 seconds. Then she wiped her face, picked up the phone, and went back to work. There was still so much to do. The video hit the internet at 7:12 the next morning. Marcus Williams didn't leak it. He didn't need to. A passenger in business class who had overheard the commotion and recorded audio on her phone had already posted a partial account on social media the night before. By midnight, 3 news outlets had confirmed the story. By dawn, every major network in America was running it. But it was Marcus's video that detonated. 9 minutes and 47 seconds, unedited, uncut, crystal clear audio. The footage showed everything. Harmon demanding Naomi's boarding pass, Harmon calling her refuse, Harmon grabbing her arm, Harmon knocking the phone from her hand, and then the slap. The crack of his open palm against her face was so loud through phone speakers that people watching in coffee shops and living rooms across the country physically flinched. By 9 in the morning, the video had 14 million views. By noon, it had 42 million. By the end of the day, it would become the most watched aviation-related video in internet history, surpassing every crash compilation and turbulence clip ever uploaded. Naomi watched none of it. She was in a conference room on the 42nd floor of Atlantic Pacific headquarters, sitting across from the company's 14 remaining senior executives. And she was doing something that none of them had ever experienced. She was listening. "I want to hear from each of you," she said. "Not what you think I want to hear, not the version your lawyers prepped you on last night. I want to know what you saw, what you knew, what you ignored, and I want to know why." The first person to speak was Thomas Grant, the Vice President of Flight Operations. He was 61 years old, a former military pilot, and he had been with the airline for 23 years. He had supervised Douglas Harmon for the past 8 of those years. "Ms. Carter," Grant said, and his voice was steady, but his hands were not. "I knew about the complaints. Not all 47, but enough. I knew Harmon had a reputation. The flight attendants called him the gatekeeper behind his back because he decided who belonged in first class and who didn't. I knew that, and I didn't act on it." "Why not?" Grant looked at his hands. "Because he was the best technical pilot I had. His safety record was spotless. His simulator scores were always top of the fleet. and the complaints were always handled by passenger relations. They never came across my desk as operational issues. They came across as customer service problems, and customer service wasn't my department. So you compartmentalized it. Yes, ma'am, I did. And the flight attendants who reported his behavior, the ones who were reassigned after filing complaints, Grant's jaw tightened. The scheduling changes were recommended by the crew management team. I signed off on them. I was told they were operational adjustments. I didn't question whether they were retaliatory because questioning that would have meant admitting there was a problem. Naomi nodded. She didn't respond immediately. She let the silence do the work. Then she moved on to the next executive. One by one, they spoke. Some were defensive. Some were honest. Some tried to split the difference. The head of international operations admitted that he had received complaints about the London hub and forwarded them to Caldwell without follow-up. The director of training acknowledged that complaint histories were never reviewed when assigning instructors. The chief financial officer revealed that the settlement budget for discrimination complaints had its own line item in the annual budget, tucked under passenger relations expenses, normalized and institutionalized like office supplies or catering costs. It took 4 hours. When the last executive finished speaking, Naomi stood up. "Thank you," she said. "That's the first honest conversation this company has had in decades. Now here's what happens next." She laid it out. Every executive who had directly participated in covering up complaints or retaliating against whistleblowers was terminated. That was 4 people. Every executive who had known about the problems and failed to act was placed on a 90-day performance plan with specific, measurable requirements for implementing new policies. That was 7 people. The remaining 3, including Thomas Grant, who had been the most forthcoming about his own failures, were retained with the understanding that their continued employment depended on their active participation in the reforms. "I'm not looking for perfection," Naomi told them. "I'm looking for people who can admit they were wrong and do better. If you can do that, there's a place for you here. If you can't, there isn't." By Friday morning, 48 hours after the assault, Atlantic Pacific Airways had issued a public statement. David Langston stood in front of cameras outside the headquarters building and did exactly what Naomi had told him to do. He told the truth. On Tuesday morning, one of our captains physically assaulted a passenger on flight AP508 because of the color of her skin. This was not an isolated incident. It was the product of a corporate culture that tolerated discrimination, silenced victims, and protected abusers. Over the past decade, our company has spent more than $23 million settling discrimination complaints through non-disclosure agreements instead of addressing the root cause. That ends today. The statement exploded. Cable news ran it on a loop. Newspapers put it on the front page. It was the first time in anyone's memory that a major American corporation had responded to a scandal not with deflection and corporate doublespeak, but with a full, unqualified admission of failure. The public response was overwhelming. The video of the assault had already made Naomi Carter a household name, even though most people still didn't fully understand who she was. The statement from Langston confirmed what the video had suggested. This wasn't just about one bad pilot. This was about a system, and someone was finally tearing it down. Then came the twist that nobody expected. On Saturday morning, 4 days after the assault, a second video surfaced. It was filmed on a cell phone by a baggage handler at JFK who had been on the tarmac when Harmon was escorted off the aircraft in handcuffs. The video showed Harmon being led to a Port Authority cruiser, but what made the video explosive was the audio. The baggage handler's phone had picked up a conversation between Harmon and his attorney who had arrived at the airport to meet him. "This is going to blow over," the attorney told Harmon. "Trust me, I've handled airline cases before. She was being difficult. You're a 30-year veteran. The union will back you. We'll get the charges reduced. 6 months from now, nobody will remember this." Harmon's response was captured clearly. "She had no business being there, Frank. You should have seen her. Hoodie, ripped jeans, in seat 1A. What was I supposed to do? Let every street kid who steals a credit card fly first class?" The audio was damning, not just because of what Harmon said, but because of how casually he said it. There was no remorse in his voice, no recognition that he had done something wrong. Even in handcuffs, even after being fired and arrested, Douglas Harmon still believed that he was the victim. The second video went viral within hours. If the first video had made people angry, the second one made them furious. The last shred of sympathy that anyone might have had for Harmon evaporated. His own words convicted him in the court of public opinion long before his case would reach a federal courtroom. Agent Walsh called Naomi that afternoon. We've obtained the second video as evidence. Combined with the communications we recovered from Harmon's personal devices, I can tell you that we're expanding the investigation. 3 additional Atlantic Pacific employees have been identified as persons of interest based on messages exchanged with Harmon. Who are they? I can't share names at this time, but I can tell you that one of them is a current captain, one is a retired station manager, and one is an active crew scheduler. The crew scheduler, Naomi said. Is that the person who reassigned flight attendants after they filed complaints? Walsh's silence told her everything. Thank you, Agent Walsh. By Monday morning, 1 week after the assault, Naomi had fired the crew scheduler, a woman named Linda Foster, who had been quietly manipulating flight assignments for 11 years to punish crew members who reported misconduct. Foster's personnel records revealed a pattern that was breathtaking in its cruelty. Every flight attendant who had filed a complaint against a pilot in the past decade had experienced a scheduling change within 60 days. Senior routes replaced with junior ones. International flights replaced with domestic hops, premium cabin assignments replaced with economy, all of it documented as routine operational adjustments, none of it flagged as retaliation. Foster didn't go quietly. She hired an attorney and threatened to sue for wrongful termination. Her attorney sent a letter claiming that Foster was a dedicated employee who had been scapegoated by new management, trying to deflect blame for systemic failures. Naomi's response was to release Foster's scheduling records to the FBI. 2 weeks after the assault, Naomi walked into a hearing room on Capitol Hill. The Senate Transportation Committee had invited her to testify about discrimination in commercial aviation. The hearing was broadcast live on C-SPAN. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Camera crews from every major network lined the back wall. Senator Gerald Whitfield was sitting on the committee dais. He had not recused himself. He was betting that no one would connect him to the incident. He was wrong. Naomi took her seat at the witness table. She was wearing a dark blue suit. Her face had mostly healed, but a faint bruise was still visible on her left cheek. She had not used makeup to cover it. She wanted the senators to see it. Ms. Carter, the committee chairman said, "Thank you for being here today. Please proceed with your opening statement." Naomi adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the camera. 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in seat 1A on Atlantic Pacific Airways flight AP508 when the aircraft's captain walked up to me, told me I didn't belong in first class, called me refuse, grabbed my arm, knocked my phone out of my hand, and then slapped me across the face. He did this because I am black. He did this because I was wearing a hoodie instead of a business suit. He did this because in 30 years of discriminating against passengers, no one at Atlantic Pacific Airways ever told him to stop. She paused. The hearing room was absolutely silent. But what happened to me is not the story I came here to tell. The story I came here to tell is about the 100 passengers who were mistreated before me and said something, and nothing changed. It's about the flight attendants who tried to protect those passengers and were punished for it. It's about the $23 million that my airline spent to buy silence instead of spending it to buy change. She turned her head slightly toward Whitfield. Their eyes met. The senator's face drained of color. And it's about the people in positions of power who witnessed discrimination and did nothing, who stood 5 feet away while it happened and said nothing, who laughed. Whitfield's hand trembled on the desk in front of him. Every camera in the room caught it. Every reporter in the gallery knew exactly who she was talking about. Discrimination in commercial aviation is not a customer service issue, Naomi continued. It is a safety issue. When airline employees are trained to judge passengers by their appearance instead of their behavior, real security threats are overlooked. When crew members are punished for doing the right thing, they stop doing the right thing. When an entire system is built to protect abusers and silence victims, that system will eventually produce exactly what it was designed to produce: violence. The testimony lasted 2 hours. Naomi answered every question with the same devastating calm that she had shown on the aircraft. She presented data. She cited specific cases. She named the policies that had failed and proposed the ones that should replace them. By the time she finished, 3 senators had tears in their eyes, and the committee chairman had called for an emergency session to draft new federal regulations. Senator Whitfield did not ask a single question. He sat motionless through the entire hearing, staring at a fixed point on the wall behind Naomi's head. The next morning, he announced that he was stepping down from the Transportation Committee, citing health concerns. 2 weeks later, 3 major donors pulled their support from his re-election campaign after the video of him watching the assault without intervening was played on national television, with his face circled in red. His political career was over. He just didn't know it yet. Douglas Harmon's trial began 4 months later in federal court in Brooklyn. The prosecution's case was built on the video, the testimony of 14 witnesses, Harmon's own recorded statements to his attorney, and the communications recovered from his phone. The defense tried to argue that Harmon had been under extreme stress, that Naomi had provoked him by refusing to comply with the captain's orders, that the incident had been blown out of proportion by media attention. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Assault in the second degree with a hate crime enhancement. The judge sentenced him to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. His pilot's license was permanently revoked. His pension, all $3.2 million of it, was voided under the morality clause in his contract. His appeal was denied. On the day of sentencing, Harmon's wife filed for divorce. His brother-in-law resigned from the pilots' union board. His college roommate at the FAA quietly took early retirement. The network of protection that had shielded Douglas Harmon for 30 years collapsed in a matter of weeks, like a building that had been rotting from the inside and finally couldn't support its own weight. Naomi did not attend the sentencing. She was in London, overseeing the final phase of the international restructuring. The new London hub manager was a woman named Priya Sharma, a former British Airways operations chief who had spent 15 years building inclusive workplace cultures across 3 continents. Under Sharma's leadership, passenger discrimination complaints at the London hub dropped to 0 within 90 days. Back in the United States, Naomi's reforms were transforming Atlantic Pacific Airways from the inside out. The company implemented mandatory bias training for every employee, from ground crew to senior management, within the 60-day window she had demanded. The training was tied to performance evaluations and promotion eligibility. Completion was not optional. A new anonymous reporting system allowed passengers and employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Reports were reviewed by an independent oversight board that reported directly to Naomi, bypassing the company's internal hierarchy entirely. Rachel Torres was promoted to senior flight attendant and appointed as the director of a new department called the Customer Dignity Initiative. Her first act was to personally review every scheduling change that had occurred in the past 5 years and reverse every reassignment that appeared retaliatory. 14 flight attendants were restored to their original routes with back pay. 3 of them cried when Rachel called to deliver the news. The FAA adopted Naomi's reforms as the foundation for new federal regulations. The Carter Protocol, as it became known, required mandatory bias prevention training for every commercial pilot seeking or maintaining a license. Other airlines didn't wait for the regulations to take effect. Within 6 months of Naomi's congressional testimony, every major American carrier had implemented some version of the protocol. Passenger discrimination complaints across the industry dropped 78%. Naomi established the Carter Foundation with $50 million from her personal fortune. The foundation provided scholarships for minority students pursuing careers in aviation, from pilots to mechanics to air traffic controllers. The first class of scholarship recipients included 27 students from communities that had historically been excluded from the industry. Among them was a young woman named Destiny Okafor from the south side of Chicago who had dreamed of flying since she was 5 years old and had never been able to afford flight school. Atlantic Pacific hired her as a first officer 6 months after she completed her training. 1 year to the day after the assault, Naomi Carter returned to JFK Terminal 4. She was not wearing a hoodie. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Not because she had changed, because this time she didn't need to be invisible. This time she wanted to be seen. She walked to gate B31, the same gate, the same flight, AP 508 to London Heathrow, the same seat, 1A. But everything else was different. The gate agent scanned her boarding pass with a warm smile and a genuine welcome. "Good morning, Miss Carter. Welcome aboard." Naomi walked down the jet bridge. Her heels clicked on the metal floor where her sneakers had been silent a year ago. She stepped onto the aircraft, and the first person she saw was Rachel Torres, standing at the cabin door in her senior flight attendant uniform, her new stripes gleaming under the soft lighting. "Welcome back, Naomi," Rachel said. Her eyes were bright. Her voice was steady. A year ago, she had been sobbing in the galley, powerless to stop a captain from assaulting a passenger. Today, she ran the department that ensured it would never happen again. "Hello, Rachel," Naomi smiled. "How's the team?" 6,000 employees trained in the past 12 months. Discrimination complaints down 91%. Passenger satisfaction at an all-time high. And 12 flight attendants who got their roots back sent me a thank you card last week that made me cry for 45 minutes. Naomi laughed. It was the first time she had laughed about anything connected to flight AP 508. She settled into seat 1A, the same leather, the same walnut trim, but the air felt different, cleaner, lighter, as if someone had opened a window in a room that had been sealed shut for decades. The PA system clicked on. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Elena Vargas from the flight deck. Welcome aboard Atlantic Pacific Airways Flight 508 to London Heathrow. Captain Vargas, a Latina woman with 18 years of experience and a spotless record. The kind of pilot that Atlantic Pacific should have been celebrating for decades, instead of protecting men like Douglas Harmon. As we prepare for departure this morning," Vargas continued, "I want to share something with you. 1 year ago today, a passenger on this very flight was assaulted by a member of our crew because of the color of her skin. That incident changed this airline. It changed this industry, and it started a conversation about dignity and respect that is still happening in airports and boardrooms and living rooms across this country. So as we taxi out today, I want to remind every passenger aboard this aircraft that you belong here, regardless of what you look like, regardless of what you're wearing, regardless of what anyone else thinks. You paid for your seat. You earned your place, and every member of this crew is here to make sure you are treated with the respect you deserve. That's not a policy. That's a promise." The cabin erupted in applause. Not polite golf claps, real applause, the kind that comes from the chest. Naomi closed her eyes and let the sound wash